My name is Myra Kesler. I'm 33 years old. And on Mother's Day, in front of 600 people, my husband slapped me across the face. The sound echoed through 12 ballroom speakers. Crystal chandeliers trembled slightly overhead. Champagne glasses froze halfway to mouths. And my mother-in-law smiled. Not shocked. Not horrified. Satisfied. Interesting thing about public humiliation. Sometimes the people enjoying it forget witnesses exist. Blood filled my mouth instantly. Copper. Warm. Sharp against my tongue. And while 600 wealthy guests stared at me beneath golden ballroom lights, I thought exactly one thing. None of you know who my mother is. 48 hours later, Grant Kesler would stand before a judge. Judith Kesler would lose control of the foundation she spent 21 years building. And I would be sitting in my mother's kitchen eating stuffed cabbage rolls while the Kesler family learned something devastating about silence. But honestly, the slap wasn't where the story started. It started 3 years earlier. The day I married into the Kesler family. I grew up in a studio apartment in Akron, Ohio. 1 bedroom. 1 bathroom. One mother who worked 3 jobs so her daughter could someday work one. My mother's name is Elena Novak. Romanian immigrant. Former court interpreter. Later, judge. Interesting transformation, honestly. Because people who survive humiliation long enough eventually learn how systems really function. Elena arrived in the United States at 23 carrying $400 and a phrasebook. That was it. No family money. No trust fund. No safety net. She interpreted court hearings during the day. Studied law at night. Took 2 buses home afterward. Then woke up and repeated the process for 8 years straight. She failed the bar exam once. Passed it the second time. Age 31. And throughout my entire childhood, she repeated one sentence constantly. No crying without a plan. Pause. Tears are data. Interesting philosophy. Because my mother believed emotions existed to reveal problems, not replace solutions. I didn't understand what she meant until much later. I graduated from Ohio State on a full scholarship. Health Administration. Summa cum laude. First job at a regional hospital system in Columbus. Compliance Department. Meaning, I investigated financial irregularities professionally. Interesting career choice considering the family I eventually married into. Grant Kesler entered my life at a hospital fundraiser. Tailored suit. Relaxed smile. The kind of confidence wealthy men inherit early enough they mistake it for personality. But honestly, he didn't seem arrogant at first. That was the dangerous part. He remembered details. Asked thoughtful questions. Listened carefully when I talked about work. Or at least, performed listening beautifully. We dated 6 months before he proposed. German village. Park bench. October rain barely starting. A diamond ring worth more than my car. And the very first warning sign arrived disguised as humor. Mom has to approve the ring first. He smiled when he said it. I laughed automatically. Grant didn't. Interesting. Because controlling families often introduce themselves as jokes first. Judith Kesler inserted herself into our engagement within 72 hours. Venue selection. Guest list. Menu changes. Flower approvals. Everything. I wanted my mother's sarmale recipe included during cocktail hour. Romanian stuffed cabbage rolls. Family recipe. Judith rejected it immediately. It would confuse the caterers. Interesting wording. Because wealthy people often rename discomfort as logistical concern. I let it go. All of it. Because honestly, I thought compromise was how women earned acceptance inside new families. I thought patience eventually became belonging. I was wrong. On my wedding day, my mother handed me a white silk handkerchief embroidered with her name in pale blue thread. Elena. Hand-stitched. She pressed it into my palm before the ceremony. Then quietly said, "Wipe your tears. Pause. Then make your plan." At the time, I thought she meant happy tears. I didn't understand yet. Harold Kesler died 21 years before I married his son. Heart attack. Age 54. Left behind a building materials company, a trust fund worth millions, and a widow who discovered control worked better than grief. Judith became trustee of everything. Grant received a monthly supplement from the trust. $3,000 every month on top of his salary. Paige received the same. Every major purchase required Judith's approval. Cars. Vacations. Repairs. Even charitable donations over $500. Interesting system. Because dependency disguised as generosity still creates dependency. Judith called it stewardship. I'm protecting what Harold built. That sentence ended most conversations immediately. Because people rarely challenge women who weaponize widowhood successfully. Later, I learned something unsettling. Judith hadn't always been this way. Her own mother-in-law humiliated her constantly when she married Harold. Called her the girl from the wrong side of the river. Interesting cycle. Because abused people sometimes heal. And sometimes they become architects of the exact same cruelty. My first Thanksgiving with the Keslers taught me everything I needed to know. I brought my mother's sarmale. 12 rolls. Glass casserole dish. Foil carefully folded over the top. The kitchen smelled like roasted turkey and expensive wine when I arrived. Judith lifted the foil. Looked at the dish. Then calmly turned toward the table and said 5 words. She is not one of us. No anger. No raised voice. Just certainty. Like commenting on weather. Paige laughed immediately. Grant stared at his plate. Cousin Rachel looked uncomfortable enough to notice. Not uncomfortable enough to intervene. Interesting category of people, honestly. Observers. The world survives on them. I picked up the dish quietly. Carried it back to the kitchen. Walked outside. Sat inside my car for 10 straight minutes with the engine off. November cold pressing against the windows. And honestly, that was the first moment I realized something important. Judith didn't dislike me because of who I was. She disliked me because I represented something she could not control completely. That night, I created a folder on my laptop. Named it Insurance. Interesting title maybe. But women raised by judges learn documentation before confrontation. I didn't know exactly what I was saving yet. I just understood something instinctively. People who humiliate others publicly eventually become careless privately. Year 2 brought the house discussion. Grant wanted a 4-bedroom colonial in Westlake. Judith immediately offered trust money for the down payment. I suggested we buy something smaller ourselves instead. Interesting reaction. Grant looked genuinely horrified. Mom will think I'm rejecting her. Not. We can't afford it. Not. That's impractical. Just fear of emotional consequences. That told me everything. Judith ended up co-signing the mortgage. Meaning her name sat beside ours legally. And honestly, that was the moment I quietly began preparing for independence. Separate savings account. Maxed out retirement contributions. Professional networking outside the Kesler circle. Emergency planning disguised as ambition. One night that year almost changed everything. Grant woke up crying around 2 a.m. Dream about his father. Voice broken open in a way I'd never heard before. Dad would have liked you. Pause. He wasn't like Mom. I held him until he fell asleep again. And honestly? For a few minutes. I saw the version of Grant that might have existed without Judith Kesler shaping every emotional reflex he had. By morning, Judith called. Grant answered. And that version disappeared again immediately. The group chat arrived in April. 3 vibrations during dinner. I glanced down accidentally. Chat title. Real Keslers. Interesting name. Because exclusion becomes easier once people formalize it. That night, after Grant fell asleep, I unlocked his phone. Passcode. His father's birthday. I opened the chat. Paige had posted a photo of me from brunch earlier that week. Caption. Marshall's clearance rack energy. 3 laughing emojis. 1 from Paige. 1 from Judith. 1 from my husband. I kept scrolling. Judith mocking my mother's accent. Paige mocking my clothes. Grant responding with thumbs up emojis and laughing faces. 47 screenshots total. I transferred every one to my laptop. Saved them inside the insurance folder. Then carefully placed Grant's phone back exactly where he left it. Interesting thing about betrayal. Once documented, it stops feeling confusing. It becomes evidence. I stood in the bathroom afterward staring at my reflection. Hands perfectly steady. And honestly, that scared me more than crying would've. Because calm means acceptance already started. Year 3 brought the gala. Judith's Kingdom. Mother's Day charity event. 600 guests. $200 a plate. Politicians. Hospital executives. Judges. Donors. Every powerful person within 40 miles orbiting Judith Kesler beneath crystal chandeliers once a year. Official beneficiary. Children's Hospital Wing. Unofficial beneficiary. Judith's ego. Paige coordinated the event. I got assigned volunteer duties. Greeting guests. Printing name tags. Organizing seating charts. Visible work. Voiceless work. And honestly, that assignment became the biggest mistake Judith Kesler ever made. Because 3 weeks before the gala, I accidentally noticed something inside her home office. Financial records. Donation totals. Vendor payments. Numbers. And numbers have always talked to me differently than people do. The donation board in the ballroom lobby displayed $280,000 raised. But Judith's internal records showed $340,000 received. Interesting gap. $60,000 doesn't disappear accidentally inside charity accounting. In compliance work, we call that a pattern. And patterns eventually become investigations. That Saturday, I drove to Akron and told my mother everything. The insults. The group chat. The donor discrepancy. 3 years compressed into 40 minutes across her kitchen table. Elena listened without interrupting once. Then calmly poured more coffee and asked the most important question. Do you have documentation? Yes. She nodded once. Then asked. What do you want, Myra? I answered honestly. I want to leave. Pause. But I want to leave standing up. My mother looked at me carefully for several seconds. Then said something that changed everything. You need them to reveal themselves in front of people who cannot unsee it. Interesting advice. Because shame survives secrecy. Exposure kills it. The gala was 2 weeks away. And honestly, I still didn't know exactly how badly the Keslers were about to destroy themselves publicly. I just knew one thing. Whatever happened next, 600 witnesses would remember it forever. 2 weeks before the gala, Judith Kesler transformed into a general preparing for war. Spreadsheets, phone calls, seating charts revised hourly, vendor meetings stretching past midnight. Interesting thing about women obsessed with appearances. They often treat public events like military campaigns. Because image becomes survival eventually. The seating chart arrived in my email Wednesday morning at 8:14 a.m. 60 tables. 600 guests. I scrolled slowly until I found my name. Table 47. Back corner of the ballroom. Behind a decorative pillar. Beside the service entrance. Interesting placement. Because humiliation inside wealthy families is rarely loud. It's architectural. Grant sat at table 1. Directly beside Judith. Center stage. Exactly where heirs belong. I called him immediately. Why am I at table 47? Long silence. Then the sigh. Interesting. Because Mother's Day arrived humid and bright. 78 degrees by noon. Cloudless sky. Perfect weather for wealthy people pretending generosity and morality naturally belong together. The Kesler Foundation Gala started at 6 p.m. Downtown Cleveland. Grand Aurora Ballroom. 600 guests. Crystal chandeliers imported from Prague. White orchids flown in from Singapore. Valet line wrapped around the block before sunset. And honestly, the entire event looked less like charity and more like power congratulating itself publicly. Interesting thing about elite fundraising events. People donate partly to help others, but mostly to be photographed helping others. I arrived at 5:12 carrying 3 things. Black clutch. Silver flash drive. And my mother's embroidered handkerchief folded carefully inside my coat pocket. Elena. Blue thread. Wipe your tears. Then make your plan. I touched the fabric once before entering the ballroom. Not for comfort. For memory. Inside. Everything gleamed. Gold table settings. Champagne towers. String quartet near the staircase. Politicians shaking hands beneath foundation banners. Judges. Hospital executives. Local news anchors. Every important person within 40 miles orbiting Judith Kesler's performance of generosity. Interesting irony, honestly. Because people obsessed with reputation often create the perfect audience for their own destruction. Judith spotted me immediately from across the ballroom. Ivory gown. Diamond necklace Harold bought before he died. Smile polished sharp enough to feel rehearsed. There you are. Not hello. Not happy Mother's Day. Just operational confirmation. Like checking whether catering staff arrived on time. She adjusted the orchid pin on my lapel without asking. Then lowered her voice slightly. Tonight matters. Pause. Try not to embarrass the family. Interesting sentence. Because people planning humiliation often project first. Grant arrived beside her moments later. Black tuxedo. Perfect cufflinks. Perfect smile. Perfect performance. He kissed my cheek lightly. And honestly, I realized something devastating. He looked exactly like a man rehearsing being a husband instead of actually feeling like one. Mom's stressed, he whispered. There are donors everywhere. Interesting priority. Not. How are you? Not. I love you. Just donor management. System maintenance. I smiled politely. Understood. Because honestly, I needed them relaxed, comfortable, careless. That's the thing about exposure. People reveal themselves best when they still believe control belongs to them. At 6:40, the donor reception began. Champagne circulating. Servers balancing silver trays through clusters of expensive conversation. And everywhere I turned, Judith performed warmth professionally. Touching elbows. Remembering names. Laughing half a second too long at powerful men's jokes. Interesting talent. Because manipulative people often study social choreography more carefully than empathy. I spent the first hour near registration. Smiling. Greeting guests. Watching. Listening. Compliance work teaches you something important. Fraud rarely hides in locked rooms. It leaks through patterns. And patterns were everywhere tonight. Vendor invoices that didn't match contracts. Silent cash donations never announced publicly. 2 donors thanking Judith personally for keeping things discreet. Interesting phrasing. Because charitable accounting becomes dangerous the second transparency disappears. At 7:18, Paige cornered me beside the dessert station. Pink satin gown. Perfect curls. Cruelty wrapped in expensive styling. She looked me up and down slowly. Then smiled. Table 47? Pause. Honestly generous considering the circumstances. Interesting thing about bullies raised wealthy. They mistake social positioning for intelligence. I sipped sparkling water calmly. What circumstances? Paige laughed softly. You know. Pause. Mom says charity begins at home. There it was. Not subtle anymore. Just performance. For her friends standing nearby. 3 women laughed automatically. Interesting. Because crowds follow humiliation quickly once rich people signal permission. I smiled politely. Then quietly asked. Did your father teach you that? Her expression flickered instantly. Tiny reaction. Massive meaning. Because Harold Kesler's name still functioned like gravity inside this family. Paige stepped closer. Careful tonight, Myra. Pause. You're replaceable. Interesting threat. Because she still thought this story was about status. Not evidence. At 7:45, the ballroom lights dimmed. Judith took the stage. Spotlights warming her silver hair gold beneath the chandeliers. 600 guests applauded automatically. And honestly, watching her stand there, I finally understood something clearly. Judith didn't love admiration. She needed it. Needed it the way drowning people need air. She began her speech beautifully. Of course she did. Stories about children's hospitals. Community support. Harold's legacy. Tears carefully timed near paragraph 4. Interesting craftsmanship honestly. Because manipulative people rehearse vulnerability more than truthful people ever do. Then came the donor totals. Projected on massive screens behind her. $280,000 raised tonight. Applause exploded instantly. Champagne glasses lifted. Standing ovation from table 1. And sitting at table 47, I realized something almost funny. Judith truly believed nobody in that room understood numbers except her. At 8:03, the live auction started. Vacation packages. Private golf outings. Luxury watches. Bidding paddles lifting beneath chandelier light like synchronized choreography. And throughout all of it, I watched Grant carefully. Interesting thing about sons raised inside controlling families. They develop emotional radar before they develop morality. He knew something was wrong tonight. Not specifics. But instinctively. He sensed structural pressure building beneath the performance. At 8:26, an older man approached my table quietly. Gray suit. Silver pocket square. Deep lines beside tired eyes. Walter Bishop. Harold Kesler's former business attorney. Retired 3 years earlier. He sat beside me without invitation. Interesting confidence. Because elderly attorneys stop fearing social rules once they've watched enough wealthy families destroy themselves. You're Elena Novak's daughter. Not a question. I nodded once. Walter studied me carefully. Then slid a cream-colored envelope across the tablecloth. No explanation. Just. Harold wanted this delivered if Judith ever became her mother. Interesting sentence. Because apparently someone else saw the cycle years before I did. Walter stood immediately afterward. No goodbye. No further explanation. Just walked back into the crowd beneath golden ballroom lights like a man relieved to finally finish carrying something heavy. My hands shook opening the envelope. First time all night. Inside. One handwritten letter. Harold Kesler's signature across the bottom. Dated 19 years earlier. Short. Simple. Devastating. Judith. If grief ever turns you cruel, our children will become afraid of love itself. And if you ever humiliate someone weaker just because you can, you've misunderstood everything I built. Harold. I read it twice. Then 3 times. Because honestly? A dead man just explained the entire Kesler family in 4 sentences. I folded the letter carefully. Placed it beside the flash drive inside my clutch. And suddenly, I stopped feeling nervous completely. Interesting thing about truth. Once enough of it gathers, fear disappears naturally. At 8:52, Grant approached my table finally. He looked pale. Mom's asking where you've been. Interesting question. Because technically, I'd been exactly where she assigned me. Invisible. I'm at my table. Grant glanced around the ballroom nervously. Then lowered his voice. Please don't start anything tonight. There it was. Not concern about me. Not concern about truth. Just fear of disruption. Interesting how often privileged people confuse accountability with chaos. I looked directly at him. Grant. Pause. Do you know your mother moved $60,000 from the donor account? His face changed instantly. Not surprise. Recognition. Huge difference. You don't understand how foundations work. Interesting defense. Because innocent people explain. Complicit people redirect. I stood slowly from table 47. Straightened my black dress calmly. And honestly? For the first time in 3 years, I felt taller than the Kesler family. Not richer. Not louder. Cleaner. The ballroom coordinator approached the stage around 9 o'clock. Tapped the microphone twice. Then announced the final family tribute portion of the evening. Please welcome Grant and Myra Kesler. Applause. Warm. Automatic. Interesting thing about audiences. They never realize they're seconds away from witnessing disaster. Grant extended his arm toward me tightly. Smile rigid now. Sweat visible near his collar. He sensed collapse coming finally. Just too late. We walked toward the stage together beneath 600 watching faces. Crystal chandeliers glowing overhead. Cameras raised. Judith smiling proudly from the front table. And honestly, I think she believed she already won. That was the tragic part. Because powerful people surrounded by obedience eventually mistake silence for permanent control. Grant leaned closer while we climbed the stage stairs. Voice barely audible. Please behave. Interesting final request. Because after 3 years? My husband still thought dignity meant staying quiet while his family destroyed me publicly. The ballroom lights blinded warm against my skin as we stepped onto the stage. 600 people watching. Judith lifting her champagne glass proudly. The microphone waiting between us. And deep inside my coat pocket, my mother's handkerchief pressed softly against my wrist. Wipe your tears. Then make your plan. Honestly? The plan was finally ready. The ballroom applauded while Grant and I stepped onto the stage. 600 people. Crystal chandeliers. Gold light reflecting across champagne glasses and polished marble floors. And honestly? The applause sounded strange suddenly. Like background noise before a building collapse. Grant kept smiling beside me. Too hard. Too rehearsed. Interesting thing about people raised inside controlling families. They learn performance before honesty. The microphone waited between us beneath the spotlight. Judith sat front row center. Ivory gown. Diamond necklace. Expression glowing with the confidence of someone who still believes the evening belongs to her. Interesting mistake. Because arrogance always looks safest seconds before exposure. Grant reached for the microphone first. Tonight is about family. There it was. Interesting word coming from people who weaponized belonging constantly. And honoring my mother's incredible dedication to this community. Applause erupted again. Automatic. Predictable. The donor screens behind us displayed smiling children from the hospital campaign beside giant